Addicts and alcoholics suffer from something we like to call terminal uniqueness. Terminal uniqueness is the condition where you think you are the only person in the world that bad things happen to. This is me at 12 years old. Normal in the sense that I look like the rest of my peers. I have acne, I have braces, I'm awkward. Abnormal in the sense that this is the year that I found out I was adopted. Not only was I adopted, I was given this bit of information. I was the I-75 baby. I was born 2 months premature, left in an ant pile, and I only weighed 3.2 pounds. Now, this was too much for my mind to cope with because I became instantly unique compared to my peers. So the way that I chose to fit in was to use drugs. So by 16 years old, I was an avid cocaine user and drinker. Not only was I a drinker, I was a blackout drinker. I realized at that very young age that I was different compared to my peers. My peers would drink and go home, and I would drink and black out. And so I walked into my very first AA meeting at 16 in my Bishop Kenny uniform. And I remember looking around, and I realized everybody was about a generation younger than me. And I felt totally disconnected, so I left, and I continued to drink and use. At 20 years old, I joined the United States military. For the first time since I was 12 years old, I looked around and I fit in. These were my people. We all had the same common goal of serving our nation and doing it with honor. My excitement was short-lived, though, because as I looked around the platoon, I realized that I was different. My hands were shaking, and I was really hating life. I was going through my first ever detox. And so I tried to mask my symptoms the best I could because I did not want to stand out. And when I joined the military, I went right back to drinking after basic because the military is known for its drinking culture. At 22 years old, I was in a foreign country and I was arrested and I was facing 14 years in a foreign prison during an alcohol-related incident. Who would have guessed? So as I walked into the military lawyer's office, I looked around at the whiteboard. I saw all of the names, all of their ranks, and all of their crimes. And I realized I wasn't that unique. Alcoholism was rampant in the military. So the Army sent me to treatment. And when I got to treatment, I was the youngest, the only female, and the lowest ranking. And so when I looked around, and I was there with seamen, airmen, Marines, and the Army, we all had the one common goal of quitting drinking. And when we started trading stories, I realized I was not that unique. They drank like I drank, and we ended up here together. I had 4 more very successful years in the military, and I came home at 26. I was placed in a reserve unit because I needed my knee replaced, but there was a massive problem. I was a raging alcoholic. So my friends, they packed me up in a vehicle, and they took me to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. I remember when I walked in, I looked around, and I knew that I deserved to be there. So I started listening. I was not very receptive because I was an angry alcoholic, and I thought I was not worthy of living. So I flipped tables, I broke coffee pots, I yelled at those people, and it was the first time in my life that somebody helped me flip those tables back over and told me to sit down and to keep coming back. It was the first time in a very long time that somebody told me to come back somewhere. And so the cornerstone of AA that I took away was service to others. Now, going to Catholic school my entire life, service was nothing new to me. Service is part of our curriculum. And then when I joined the military, it was just added on. And so what I did, I started walking around the streets of downtown Jacksonville. Now, at 27 years old, I was finally done with the military. I was medically discharged, but my identity was taken from me in an instant, and everything changed. So I was a year sober, and they had promised me in AA that I was going to have a happy, joyous, and free life. But I was miserable. And so feeling disconnected from my community, I tried to take my life. One day, after a noon meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, a woman came up to me and she said, "Katie, you ever thought about helping veterans here at home?" I said, "No," because I'm a selfish, self-centered human being as an alcoholic. Of course, I had never thought of helping people that made it back. And so I started wandering around the downtown Jacksonville, talking to the homeless. And little by little, I heard my pain and theirs, and their pain and mine. And I was connected through them through suffering and disconnection. And so over time, I started volunteering a lot of my time in the homeless shelters. And I found Chris. Chris is an Army veteran that needed a hand up in life. And so I took him into my home. And I found him a job. And I got him an apartment. And 3 years later, he is still in the same job and in the same apartment. And finally, I understood what it meant when they told me that I would give away what was so freely given to me, a happy, joyous, and free life. Because when I walked around the streets of downtown Jacksonville, I connected with the homeless because I was born into homelessness and chaos, and that's where I thrived. And addicts and alcoholics, the only thing that is ever said between us is "me too." The commonality of "me too" breaks the stigma. And so this change has never been more apparent in myself than in this last year and a half. I asked for a DNA test from Ancestry.com on the fair chance that I would match somebody. The results were in 8 weeks later, and lo and behold, I matched somebody. So in my 29 years of being alive at this point, I had thought that my mother was a prostitute, a drug addict, an unwed Catholic mother. Who would have guessed? She was none of those things. She was 33, she was married with 7 kids, and she continued to have children after me. I am one of 11. And so I went down, and I met this woman, and I sat across from her, and I was able to have an open and honest conversation. And I forgave her. Not for her, but for me. Because it turns out when you do the right thing in the world, people start watching, and they start recognizing what you're doing. And so I started winning awards for what I was doing in the homeless community here in Jacksonville. The first one I won, they put my face on a banner. They put it in the City Hall atrium, which I thought was cool. But I had won the Service in Uniform Award for Hands on Jacksonville. If anybody knows, Cabot Cheese is a collective of farmers from around the country. Now, once a year, they get together as a collective, and they recognize 50 volunteers from around the country for the good they do for their community. Last year, I got picked, and they sent me on an Alaskan cruise. This is me and my dad, and it happens to be his 70th birthday, and I got to take him on the cruise with me. And this was the first time, one of the first times, I knew for a fact that my dad was proud of who I became. The last award I won was interesting because it came from the President of the United States. Me, an addict and an alcoholic, and a lot of other things. I was being recognized for the good that I was putting into this world because it turns out when you put good into the world, everybody recognizes it. Now, the last of my terminal uniqueness ended in this year. On February 10th of this year, I got a phone call from Ancestry. I had another full-blooded sibling. Now, within our first conversation, I realized I was no longer unique. We had the same birth story. Left on the side of the road, in Gainesville, she was left 10 months prior. So if you're keeping count, that's now 12. And this is me and my sister. I met her a month ago. My story is unique, but so is yours. The commonality we have is that we all suffer And we all feel disconnected at times. Now, whether it's you use drugs, you drink, you work too much, you overeat, we all find ways to get us out of us. I found myself, when I started giving back to the community, there was no uniqueness. There was no need to use or drink anymore. Now, I am Katie, the child that was left on the side of the road. I am Katie, the child that was adopted and loved. I am Katie, the soldier, the addict, the alcoholic, but most importantly, I'm Katie, the servant. Who are you?